But half of us, maybe more than half of us, once we thought about that central thing, want to avoid thinking about anything else again as long as we live. So other issues are often very bad in our community. I've talked about racism, sexism, all these isms. They're actually very prevalent in the gay community. Something shocking. It shocked me. Profoundly shocked me. I remember it first hit me when we had some protest march back in the early 1990s when I was very young. And the protest march, we automatically reached out because we wanted it to also support. There was an issue about race going on in the UK at the time. I can't remember the exact details. I was horrified at the reaction I had from some of the other people who I thought were right on, progressive types who were going to go out there and march against the evils of Mrs. Thatcher. And they threw up their hands in horror when it was suggested that we also show solidarity with our brothers and sisters on this matter. So it kind of shocked me. I should have known better, I guess. But the fact that we've had to think about one issue doesn't mean to say that we think about all of them. Well, I'm afraid we really have to. Fundamentally, God is truth. So if you're hiding in a lie somewhere, you're also hiding from God. That's not just an allegory, that's literal truth for you. You can take that to the bank. If your spirituality rests upon a fantasy, it's not God. If you're given a choice between a fond thing vainly invented, which you've been brought up to believe is at the heart of your faith, and truth, always go for truth. Because what you thought was Jesus will always turn out not to be. God and Jesus cannot exist in a falsehood. They cannot exist in a fantasy. They cannot exist in a lie. It is impossible. God is truth is truth. Truth is at the heart of God. Truth-telling is at the heart of the story of the cross. And the fact that Jesus would not resort to fantasy and lies is why Jesus was lifted up on the cross. And I firmly believe Jesus knew it from the moment he started to open his mouth, that that's where it would lead. Let me read you a very short section from the Dream of the Rood. Now I rise up, glorious under the heavens, and I am able to heal each one of those who hold me in awe. Formerly, I was the most fierce of torments, most hateful to people, before I opened the right path of life to them. That is the cross speaking of the Dream of the Rood. Jesus never resorted to coercion or magic. Jesus, whenever he did anything out of the ordinary, was for a profound reason laden with meaning, and usually at the request of other people. Jesus could have escaped the cross on numerous occasions, but Jesus knew that he was moving in the world. That wonderful Greek word, cosmos, that means something very specific. It really means the manufactured human world. What we call the world half the time, and what we call reality. But in fact, it's something that we made up on the spur of the moment. And something that if we wanted to change it tomorrow, well, by common consent, it would change by God. Something that only really exists in our minds, that has no objective meaning. A bit like all that economic growth over the last 20 years. It doesn't really have any objective meaning. There's nothing solid there. Nobody's making stuff. There's no gold behind it or anything like that. It's moving numbers around on paper.
Yes.
And that's reality, we are told. Well, we live in a similar sort of world of realities. But they're not. They're fantasies. The idea that one person is better than the other just because they got more money in the bank or because they was born with a title. Nonsense! Deep within us, we know that's nonsense, but in the daily life in which we act out, we pay it lip service. We move in the world as if it was true. So as soon as Jesus entered that world and started speaking words of truth, I believe Jesus knew where it would end. That his words were fatal words that gave life. Christianity is full of paradoxes. The cross is one of those fundamental paradoxes. a thing of shame and torture that becomes so sweet. A sign of our redemption, a sign of our resurrection, a sign that God loves us, a sign that God isn't just playing with us, a sign that God is not just one of those airy-fairy avatars that floats down from heaven. Sometimes you see them in Hindu iconography. Somebody with an angelic blue face on a cloud who comes down and imparts words of wisdom to the poor benighted heathens and then ascends back in a cloud. Oh, no, 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 no. Oh no, this was a God that would come amongst us robed in flesh, a God that sweated and ate, a God that went to the bathroom, a God that did all these things, a God that spoke truth and took the consequences of speaking truth because he knew that he dwelt in the world, and unless that world was ripped open for all to see the maggoty interior, that world would never fall. And therefore, just like in the Old Testament, where Moses raised up the staff with a brazen serpent upon it that all the peoples may be healed, Jesus was raised up on that cross that all who gazed upon him may be healed. This is why the significance of the blood is so important to many Christians. Many of us go, oh, that's unpleasant. And some of us associate it with a theology and a Christianity that's very alien to us. But to others, it is a concrete sign that God loves us even in our despair.
Yes.
Understands our despair so deeply that he joined in our despair. And Jesus Christ, that terrible cry from the cross, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? That moment where Jesus honestly believed he was alone and forsaken, and therefore was one of us. Because we talk about joy and happiness a great deal in church, but so many of our actions are driven by misery and sorrow. We never talk about our misery, we never talk about our sorrow. So many people who are on the verge of despair will not come into church when they are on the verge of despair, when that's exactly where they need to be.
That's right.
We need some forum, some meeting where we can talk to one another about what afflicts us, what makes us miserable and desperate, where we come close to despair. Because the fact is, we think we are uniquely cursed by this, and that everyone walking along in the street, we believe their propaganda and their sunny exteriors. But the fact is, we'd only tell the truth to one another, we'd realize we're all in the same boat.
That's right.
And we understand where some of this old theology about mourning and weeping and this veil of tears comes from, because actually the reality of much of our life is this veil of tears. There is so much sorrow and so much grief. And unless it was something which can be treated as gold, something which is the tempering furnish which purifies the precious metal, then it's bankrupt. And unless we can know that God is there with us, even there, even at the extreme when we feel despair, then God is no God at all. God must be in all things that are real and truthful. And sometimes there is nothing more truthful than our sorrow.
That's right.
There is nothing more honest than our despair. So God dwells with us in the cross, and that is the triumph of the cross, that all those that look upon it may be healed. And there, somewhere in that mystery, you leave the world of symbolism and you enter the world of grace and the supernatural relationship between humanity and God. And I can go no further in explaining that to you. At the center of the cross there is a mystery.
Yes.
The God that lives in inaccessible light, the God that lives in a cloud of unknowing, dwells in that cross. And that is why that cross has such profound significance to us. But we may rest upon that cross. I had a strange feeling when I first came to the cross, and some would say it was very morbid. A lot of people argue about what the cross actually was and how Jesus was crucified, and it's often called the tree, of course. It's not always described as the cross as we see it.